Millionaire went to Orphanage to make a donation and saw a boy identical to his missing son. Richard Thompson adjusted his tie for the third time that morning as his driver parked in front of St. Anthony's home. Another year, another obligatory donation to maintain the social appearances his position demanded. But this time something different awaited him inside those whitewashed walls. It was when his eyes landed on the boy playing alone in the courtyard that his world completely stopped. The child was exactly the age Matthew would be now, with the same messy brown hair, the same way of tilting his head when concentrating. Even the small scar above his left eyebrow was there, identical to the one his son had gotten at 4 years old after falling off his new bike. "Mr. Thompson, what an honor to have you here again," said Mrs. Davidson, the orphanage director, approaching with a forced smile. "Shall we go to my office to discuss this year's donation?" Richard could barely tear his gaze away from the boy. 3 years. 3 long years since Matthew had disappeared during that cursed trip to Key West. A moment of distraction on the crowded beach, desperate screams, fruitless searches. And now that child was playing there just a few feet away as if nothing had happened. "That boy over there," Richard pointed discreetly. "How long has he been here?" Mrs. Davidson followed his gaze and sighed. "Oh, little Michael. He arrived here 3 years ago, poor thing, a very sad situation. His mother couldn't take care of him. Michael. Even the name started with an M like Matthew." Richard felt his heart race in his chest. Can I speak with him?" "Of course, Mr. Thompson. Michael is a very special child. Intelligent, well-mannered, but he keeps his distance from others. He's never spoken much about his past." They walked over to where the boy was sorting small wooden blocks by color, creating symmetrical patterns. It was exactly how Matthew used to play. Richard knelt beside the child, his hands trembling slightly. "Hi, Michael. I'm Richard. I really like how you organize your toys." The boy looked up, and Richard had to steady himself to keep from crying out. They were the same expressive green eyes as Matthew's, with that particular spark when something interested him. "Thank you, sir. I like when things are in the right place," Michael replied softly, but there was something familiar in his tone, in the cadence. "Michael, do you remember where you came from before living here?" The boy hesitated, running his hand through his hair in a way that made Richard swallow hard. Matthew used to make the exact same gesture when deep in thought. "Sometimes I dream of a big house with a blue pool, and there's a song that stays in my head, but I don't know where it's from," Michael whispered, as if sharing a secret. Richard closed his eyes for a moment. The big house with the blue pool was the perfect description of his home in Beverly Hills. And the song, could Matthew still remember the lullaby Jennifer used to sing every night? "Michael, could you sing a little bit of that song for me?" The boy glanced around, checking if anyone was listening, then softly hummed a melody that made Richard feel like he'd been punched in the gut. It was "Rockabye Baby," the exact version Jennifer had learned from her grandmother and adapted with her own words. A version no other child in the world would know. "Mr. Thompson, are you all right?" Mrs. Davidson appeared beside them, noticing the sudden paleness of the businessman. Yes. Michael really is a special child. Mrs. Davidson, we need to talk in private." They headed to the director's office, a small room furnished with old but well-kept furniture. Richard was trying to organize his thoughts, but emotion was taking over everything. "Mrs. Davidson, I need to know everything about how Michael came here. Everything." The director settled into her chair, noticing the urgency in his voice. "Well, it was an unusual situation. A woman arrived here on a rainy night 3 years ago with the boy. She said she could no longer care for him, that she had serious financial problems. It was an emergency." "What did this woman look like? Did she leave any documents, any information?" She was middle-aged, well-dressed, though she seemed nervous. Grey hair, a country accent. She left Michael's documents, birth certificate, vaccination card, all in order. The last name was Williams. Richard recognized that description. It was almost identical to Gloria's, the family's former maid who had been fired shortly before Matthew's disappearance. Gloria Williams, who had worked in his home for 5 years and knew every detail of their family routine. "Mrs. Davidson, This woman. Did she say where she was from? Did she leave any contact information? No, Mr. Thompson, but I can tell you she cried a lot when she left the boy. She said she'd come back for him when she got back on her feet, but she never returned. Oh, and there's something strange. What? Every month for the past 3 years, we've received an anonymous bank transfer to cover Michael's expenses. Always on the 15th, always the exact amount. Whoever it is cares deeply for this child. Richard's heart pounded so hard, he feared Mrs. Davidson might hear it. The 15th was Matthew's birthday. His wife Jennifer always grew particularly melancholy on that date every month since the disappearance. I need to see these documents. Is that possible? Well, that would be irregular, Mr. Thompson, only with a court order or... Mrs. Davidson. Richard leaned forward, his voice thick with emotion. I have reason to believe Michael might be my missing son. I need your help. The director paled. Mr. Thompson, this is very serious. If there's even a possibility. My son Matthew disappeared 3 years ago, around the same time Michael arrived here. They're the same age, have identical physical features, the same habits. Please, I need to examine the documents. Mrs. Davidson fell silent for a few minutes, clearly torn between protocol and the human situation before her. I'll fetch his records. But Mr. Thompson, if your suspicions are confirmed, we'll need to involve the proper authorities. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us newcomers a lot. Now back to the story. As he waited, Richard watched Michael through the window. The boy had abandoned his blocks and was now drawing something on the ground with a stick. Even from a distance, Richard could see they were perfect circles, just like Matthew used to make when he was little. His mother always said it was a sign of early intelligence. Mrs. Davidson returned with a well-organized folder. The documents looked authentic at first glance, but Richard noticed some odd details. The birth certificate had slightly different paper quality than official documents, and the notary's signature seemed a bit smudged. Mrs. Davidson, may I take photos of these documents? I need to verify a few things. Only for personal and legal use, Mr. Thompson. Richard carefully photographed each page. His mind was already forming a plan. He knew a discreet and efficient document expert who could analyze everything in a few hours. Is there anything else you remember about the day Michael arrived here? Let me think. Oh yes. The woman specifically asked about our visitation policy. She wanted to know if people could come see the children even without adoption intentions. I thought it was strange at the time. And you allow this? Yes, we have a godparent program. People who visit the children, bring gifts, take them on outings. Michael never had a godparent, despite being such a lovable child. Richard courteously said goodbye, promising to return soon with the promised donation. But his mind was entirely focused on uncovering the truth about Michael. On his way home, he called Dr. Stephen Miller, a family lawyer who had handled delicate cases for his company before. Stephen, I need your help with something very personal and urgent. Of course, Richard. What is it? I might have found my son. I need an expert in documents and someone who can discreetly investigate the history of a bank transfer. My God, Richard, are you sure about this? Not yet, but the evidence is very strong. I need to act quickly but quietly. If we're right, someone behind this must not know we've found out. Understood, I'll gather my team. I should have preliminary answers by tomorrow. Richard arrived home and found Jennifer in the living room, flipping through a magazine without really reading it. Over the past 3 years, she had become a shadow of herself. The joyful, vibrant woman he had once known had turned into a melancholic person, constantly living in the past. How was the donation? She asked without looking up. It was enlightening. Richard hesitated. Should he tell her about Michael? Jennifer's reaction to false hopes in the early months after the disappearance had been devastating. Jen, do you remember Gloria? The maid we fired. Why are you asking about her? Just crossed my mind. She knew our routine well, didn't she? She did. Worked here for 5 years, practically raised Matthew with us. Why the strange question? Richard noticed something in her tone. a subtle tension that hadn't been there before. Nothing serious, just thinking about who had access to our house back then. Jennifer finally looked up, and Richard saw something different in her eyes. Not nostalgia or sadness, something more like fear. "Richard, you're not thinking of reopening that investigation, are you? We've been through this. The therapist said we need to accept and move on." "Of course not, darling, just reminiscing." But Richard lied. His business instincts, sharpened by years of complex negotiations, were sounding alarms. Jennifer was hiding something, and he intended to find out what. That night, Richard barely slept. He kept imagining Michael alone at the orphanage, probably wondering why his parents never came for him. If it really was Matthew, how much psychological trauma had the child already endured, and who would be capable of tearing a child from his family? The next morning, Dr. Stephen called early. "Richard, we have news. Michael Williams' documents are very well-made forgeries. The certificate number doesn't exist in the official records. As for the bank transfers, they come from a national bank account, but the trail is complex." "Go on." "The account was opened with what also appear to be forged documents, but there's an interesting lead. The transfers are always made from a specific ATM, always at the same Beverly Hills mall." Richard's chest tightened. Jennifer visited that mall every week. It was where she did all her shopping since they moved to Beverly Hills. "Stephen, I need one more thing. Discreetly investigate my wife's bank activity over the past 3 years, especially transfers or cash withdrawals." "Richard, that's delicate." "I know, but I need answers." After hanging up, Richard decided to return to the orphanage. This time he wanted to talk more with Michael, perhaps ask some specific questions only Matthew would know the answers to. He found the boy in the orphanage library, flipping through a children's storybook. Richard approached slowly. "Hi, Michael. Can I sit here?" "Sure, Mr. Thompson. Mrs. Davidson said you're very generous with our home." "Michael, do you like stories? I love them, especially the ones about families being reunited." Richard felt a lump in his throat. "And you? Have you ever had a pet?" Michael's eyes lit up. "I sometimes dream about a small dog, brown and black. He had a red collar and slept in my bed." "Do you think it was real?" Richard had to restrain himself from hugging the boy right then. He was perfectly describing Max, the Pomeranian Matthew had gotten for his 5th birthday, who had died of grief a few months after the boy disappeared. "Michael, do you remember any special name? A name that comes to mind when you close your eyes?" The boy stayed quiet for a moment, his eyes closed in concentration. "Sometimes I hear someone calling me Matt, but I don't know why. My name is Michael." Richard had to step away briefly, pretending to look for a book on a distant shelf. Matthew. His son had been found, but someone had erased his identity, stolen his memories, destroyed his childhood. And he was starting to suspect who. "Michael, would you like to go out for ice cream with me this afternoon? I can ask Mrs. Davidson for permission." "Really? I've never gone out before." "Of course you can. We'll have a great time." During their outing, Richard watched Michael's every reaction. On the way to the ice cream shop, they passed a toy store, and the boy stopped in front of the window, fascinated by a red fire truck. "Do you like fire trucks, Michael?" "I love them. Sometimes I dream I have a whole collection of them. All red." It was Matthew's collection. 15 red fire trucks of different sizes, carefully kept on a shelf in his room. Richard had donated them all after the disappearance, unable to bear seeing the abandoned toys. "Michael, would you like to come see my house one day? I have a really big pool, blue like the one you dream about." The boy looked at him curiously. "Are you married? Do you have kids?" "Yes, I'm married. And I had a son who went far away a few years ago. He must really miss you." Richard had to turn away to hide his tears. "Michael, if you found out you had a family looking for you, a family that loves you very much, what would you do?" "I'd run to them and never leave again," the boy answered without hesitation. "I always knew I had a real family somewhere. Mrs. Davidson says it's just imagination, but I feel it here." He touched his chest. "That someone's looking for me." Richard couldn't hold back any longer. He knelt in front of Michael and gently held his small hands. "Michael, I need to tell you something very important, but you have to promise to keep it a secret for now, okay?" The boy nodded solemnly. "I believe you're my son, Matthew. I think someone brought you to the orphanage because they wanted to keep us apart. But now I've found you, and I'll do everything to prove you're my son and take you home." Michael stayed silent for a few minutes, processing the information. Then slowly he raised his little hand and touched Richard's face. "I knew it. Ever since you arrived yesterday, I felt something different. Like you were my real dad." Richard hugged the boy, not caring about the passers-by who glanced curiously. 3 years of agony, 3 years of guilt and despair, and finally, he had his son back in his arms. "Matthew, Daddy's taking you home. But first I need to find out who did this to us." "Is my name really Matthew?" "Yes, my son, Matthew Richard Thompson, and you're 7 years old, turning 8 in December." "I knew December was important. Every year on December 15th, I feel really sad and don't know why." Richard froze. Matthew was born on December 17th, not the 15th. December 15th was Jennifer's birthday. Why would his son unconsciously associate that date with sadness? Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, back to the story. On the way back to the orphanage, Richard began piecing together a horrifying puzzle. Jennifer always acted strange around the 15th of every month. The bank transfers always happened on that date. And now he'd discovered that Matthew had a negative emotional reaction to his own mother's birthday. "Matthew, do you remember the woman who brought you to the orphanage? What did she look like?" "She was an older lady with white hair. She cried a lot and said I'd be okay, that it was just for a little while. But she never came back." "Did she say anything specific to you?" "She told me to forget the past, that I had a new life now, and she gave me medicine every day for a few months, said it would help me stay calm." Richard felt a rage he'd never known before. They drugged his son to erase his memories. It was monstrous, calculated, cold. "Matthew, from now on, don't take any medicine anyone gives you, okay? And if anyone comes to visit you at the orphanage, you tell me right away." "Okay, Daddy." Hearing his son call him Daddy again was like breathing after 3 years underwater. Back at the orphanage, Richard explained to Mrs. Davidson that he needed to handle Michael's legal paperwork properly, but asked her to keep his suspicions completely confidential. The director, clearly moved by the situation, promised full cooperation. That night, Richard came home determined to confront Jennifer. He found her in the kitchen, making dinner with a calmness that now seemed artificial. "Jen, we need to talk." "About what, honey?" she asked without turning, still chopping vegetables. "About Matthew." The knife stopped mid-cut. Richard noticed she took a few seconds before turning around. "Richard, we've talked about this. We can't live in the past, it's too painful. What if I told you he might be alive?" This time Jennifer dropped the knife. Her reaction wasn't hope or relief, it was pure panic. "That's impossible. You know it's impossible. Why are you doing this to me? Why are you so sure it's impossible, Jen? Because it was investigated, because it's been 3 years, because you know exactly where he is?" The silence that followed was deafening. Jennifer braced herself against the counter, hands visibly shaking. "Richard, you're talking crazy, and am I? Then explain the monthly transfers you make every 15th. Explain why you fired Gloria a week before he disappeared. Explain why you were so sure we shouldn't hire private investigators." Jennifer started crying, but these weren't tears of sadness. They were the desperate tears of someone who'd been caught. "You don't understand. You never understood anything." "Then make me understand, Jen. Explain how a mother could do this to her own son." "I'm not his mother," she screamed, then immediately covered her mouth as if she couldn't believe what she'd said. Richard felt the world spin around him. "What did you say?" I didn't mean that." "Jen, what did you mean by not being Matthew's mother?" She collapsed into a chair, her face buried in her hands. "Richard, there are things you don't know. Things I never had the courage to tell you." "What things?" "Matthew isn't my biological son." Richard sank heavily into the chair beside her. In 8 years of marriage, Jennifer had never mentioned this. How is that possible? I was there when he was born. I saw you pregnant. I was pregnant, yes, but I lost the baby in the 7th month. A rare complication, the baby was stillborn. I fell into a deep depression, and you were traveling so much for work you barely noticed my state. Richard tried to process the information, but nothing made sense. Then where did Matthew come from? I was volunteering at Mercy Hospital's maternity ward. There was a teenager who got pregnant and couldn't raise the child. She was desperate. Her parents had kicked her out. The baby was born the same day I lost mine. And you? I offered her financial help in exchange for keeping the baby. It wasn't a legal adoption, Richard. It was an informal agreement. The girl signed some papers. I prepared myself. I took the baby and registered him as our son. Richard was in shock. Matthew wasn't biologically either of theirs, but that didn't lessen the love he felt for him. Why did you never tell me? Because you wanted a child so badly. You were so happy when I said I was pregnant. I couldn't disappoint you again, not after 2 failed attempts before. And the birth mother? Amber. She was 16 at the time. After taking the money, she vanished completely. I never heard from her again. Jen, this still doesn't explain why Matthew disappeared, or why you've been transferring money to the orphanage. Jennifer's face closed off again. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't lie to me. Not anymore. I found Matthew. Jen, he's alive. He's at St. Anthony's Home, registered under the name Michael Williams, and someone's been paying his expenses there. Jennifer turned deathly pale. That's impossible. Not only possible, real. And you're going to explain to me now how our son ended up there. Richard, you have to understand. Understand what? That you kidnapped our own son. I was protecting him. From who, Jennifer? Who were you protecting our son from? From his birth mother. Amber came back. She found out where we lived, started blackmailing me. She wanted money, a lot of money, and threatened to tell you everything and take Matthew away. Richard stood, pacing back and forth, trying to process it all. And you thought the solution was to make our son disappear? I panicked, Richard. Amber was getting more aggressive. She said she'd tell Matthew I wasn't his real mother, that she'd destroy our family. I couldn't lose both of you. So, you chose to let him lose us. I thought it would be temporary. Gloria helped me. She took Matthew somewhere safe while I dealt with Amber. But then you called the police. It turned into this huge scandal, and I couldn't bring him back without you finding out everything. And Gloria blackmailed you too? No. Gloria truly believed she was protecting Matthew. She took him to her mother's place in Tennessee, but the old woman got sick and couldn't care for him anymore. That's when we decided the orphanage would be temporary. 3 years, Jennifer. 3 years. I was going to get him, Richard. I was working up the courage to tell you everything. Amber disappeared again 6 months ago. I thought it was finally safe to bring Matthew back. Richard braced himself against the wall, trying to absorb the magnitude of the betrayal and the madness of it all. Where's Gloria now? In rural Tennessee, taking care of her sick mother. She feels guilty about what we did. She sends letters asking me to bring Matthew back. You destroyed his life, Jen. You destroyed our family. Over blackmail that could have been resolved in 1,000 other ways. I know I ruined everything. But Richard, we can fix this. We can get Matthew back and be a family again. We? Richard turned to her with a fury he'd never felt before. There is no we anymore, Jennifer. You lied to me for 3 years. You let me believe our son might be dead. You watched me fall apart, watched me blame myself, and never said a word. Richard, please. And worst of all, you let a 4-year-old child believe he was abandoned by his parents. You destroyed his childhood, may have caused irreversible trauma. For money, Jennifer, out of fear of blackmail. I was trying to protect our family. You were protecting yourself. And you destroyed our son in the process. Richard left the kitchen and headed to the bedroom. He grabbed a suitcase and started packing clothes. What are you doing? Jennifer followed him. I'm leaving this house, and tomorrow morning, I'm going to get my son. Our lawyer will start the custody process, and you will cooperate fully. You'll tell the authorities the whole truth. You'll track down Gloria so she can corroborate the story. And you'll do whatever it takes to get Matthew's situation straightened out. And then? Then we'll see if we can fix the damage you did to an innocent child's life. But between us, Jennifer, it's over. When someone is capable of what you've done, there's no going back. Richard, I love you. I love Matthew. I made a terrible mistake, but it was out of love. It wasn't love. It was selfishness and cowardice. Love would have been telling me the truth from the start. Love would have been facing the blackmail together. Love would have protected our son instead of traumatizing him. Richard finished packing and headed for the door. He stopped and turned one last time. Oh, and Jen. I hope Amber is really far away, because if we find out she played any active role in Matthew's disappearance, or if she shows up trying to cause trouble now, I'll make sure she faces criminal charges for everything. Amber wasn't actively involved. She just wanted money. Then she'd better keep it that way. Richard left the house and went straight to a hotel. All night he thought about how to tell Matthew the whole truth. How do you explain to a 7-year-old that the life he knew was a lie? How do you rebuild a father-son relationship after 3 years of forced separation? The next morning, Richard called Dr. Stephen. Stephen, I need to speed up the whole process. I have the answers now, and it's worse than we imagined. What did you find out? My wife orchestrated our son's disappearance. She confessed everything last night. I need you to prepare all the paperwork for me to get full custody of Matthew, and I want her to face legal consequences for what she did. Richard, this is very serious. We'll need her testimony, witnesses. She'll cooperate. She has no choice now, and we have the maid who helped her. She's in rural Tennessee. I'll get everything ready. We could get temporary custody as early as today if the orphanage cooperates. Richard arrived at St. Anthony's home early and found Matthew in the cafeteria, eating breakfast alone at a corner table. The boy smiled when he saw him, and Richard felt his heart warm. Daddy, you came back. I promised I would, didn't I? And now I have very important news for you. They sat in the small backyard garden of the orphanage, and Richard took a deep breath before speaking. Matthew, do you remember when you said you dreamed of a family looking for you? I remember. I am that family. You really are my son, and I have all the proof now. You're not Michael Williams. You're Matthew Richard Thompson. You're 7 years old, and you're my beloved son who disappeared 3 years ago. Matthew stayed quiet for a few minutes, taking in the information. And my mom? Was she looking for me too? Richard hesitated. How could he explain Jennifer's betrayal without completely destroying the image of a mother the boy might still have? Your mom is very confused, Matthew. She made some mistakes because she was scared, but now Daddy is here to take you home and take care of you. She doesn't want me anymore. That's not it, son. It's just, sometimes adults make bad choices when they're scared or confused. Your mom loves you, but she needs to work through some of her own problems before she can be a real mother to you. Can I go home with you today? Not yet, but very soon. Daddy is sorting out some important paperwork to prove you're my son, but in the meantime, I'll come visit you every day, and you can tell me everything you remember about our life together. I remember more things since yesterday. I remember our house, my room with the fire truck toys. I remember Max. Max was really sad when I left, wasn't he? Richard had to swallow his shock. Max had died of grief, but he couldn't tell Matthew that. Max missed you terribly, son, but now when you come home, Daddy will get you another puppy. How about that? Can I name him Max too? Of course you can. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. That afternoon, Richard received an unexpected call from Jennifer. Richard, I need to tell you something important. Amber called this morning. What do you mean she called? I thought she had disappeared. She saw in the papers about a businessman investigating children in orphanages. Richard, she found out you located Matthew. Richard felt a chill down his spine. What does she want? She wants to see Matthew, says she has rights over him as his birth mother. Rights? She sold her son, Jennifer, and 3 years ago she vanished after extorting you. I know. but she's threatening to cause trouble. Says she'll go to the authorities claiming Matthew was taken from a foster family. What foster family? Richard, there are things I haven't told you yet. Amber didn't just disappear 3 years ago. She took Matthew. Richard nearly dropped the phone. What do you mean she took Matthew? Her blackmail had reached a breaking point. She wanted $500,000 to disappear for good and never bother our family again. When I told her I didn't have that kind of money, she just took Matthew. Jennifer, are you telling me Amber kidnapped our son and you never told me? I was trying to handle it alone. Gloria went after her, managed to convince her to give Matthew back, but then we decided it would be safer to leave him at the orphanage until Amber was gone for good. And you agreed to that? I had no choice. It was that or never see Matthew again. At least at the orphanage, I knew he was safe, fed, cared for. Richard was beginning to realize Jennifer's betrayal ran even deeper than he'd imagined. Where was Amber all these 3 years? I don't know. Gloria said she took the money she got and went abroad, but now she's back. And how did she find out I located Matthew? She has connections everywhere. Richard, I need to warn you, Amber isn't stable. When she wanted something, she was capable of anything to get it. Anything like what? Like taking a child from the beach during a family trip. How to pose as a hotel employee to access restricted areas. How to convince a child to go with her by promising to find his parents. Richard felt the world spin once again. Jen, are you telling me Amber went to Key West and kidnapped Matthew from the beach? Yes, she had it all planned. She knew our schedule, knew where we were staying. Gloria helped her because she believed it was an emergency, that Amber needed to protect her son from something. And then? Then Amber changed her mind about returning Matthew, said she would raise him as her own, that we didn't deserve to have a child. That's when Gloria realized Amber had serious mental issues. And did you manage to get Matthew back from her? Gloria had to promise a lot of money and threaten to involve the police. But Amber only agreed to leave Matthew at the orphanage, not to return him to us. Richard was trying to process the magnitude of the situation. His son had been kidnapped by his own birth mother, who apparently had serious psychiatric problems. Jen, where is Amber now? I don't know, but she said she'll show up at the orphanage tomorrow to take Matthew. Richard, she has the original birth documents. Technically, she can claim custody. Not if she abandoned the child and then kidnapped him. Stephen will know how to handle this. Richard immediately called his lawyer. Stephen, we have a serious complication. The birth mother has reappeared and is threatening to claim custody. Richard, this changes everything. We need to speed up the process and involve the authorities now. If there's a custody dispute with the birth mother, the case becomes much more complex. She kidnapped the child once. Doesn't that count against her? It does, but we need proof, and we need to ensure Matthew is protected until we sort this out. What do you suggest? I'll go to the orphanage right now with a team of social workers. We'll document everything and request legal protection for Matthew. No one can remove him from the orphanage without a court order. What if Amber shows up there? The staff will be instructed not to hand the child over to anyone and to call the police immediately. Richard spent the rest of the day at the orphanage, explaining the situation to Mrs. Davidson and staying close to Matthew. The boy sensed the tension in the air. Daddy, is something bad happening? Not bad, son, just complicated, but Daddy will fix everything. Do you trust me? I do. Then listen carefully. If a woman comes here saying she's your mother, you don't go with her, okay? You call Mrs. Davidson and say you want to talk to me. Is she the woman who brought me here? Maybe. Matthew, this woman might try to confuse you, might say things that scare you. But remember, Daddy is here and won't let anything bad happen to you. Okay, Daddy. That night, Richard stayed at a hotel near the orphanage. At 2 in the morning, he got a call from Mrs. Davidson. Mr. Thompson, you need to come here now. There's a woman trying to break into the orphanage. She says she's Michael's mother and has come to take her son. Did you call the police? I already did, but she's very agitated, screaming that they're stealing her son. Richard arrived at the orphanage to a chaotic scene. Amber, a woman around 30 with disheveled hair and dirty clothes, was shouting outside the gate while 2 officers tried to calm her. He's my son. I'm his mother. You can't stop me from seeing my son. Richard approached the officers. "I'm Richard Thompson. This woman kidnapped my son 3 years ago." Amber turned to him with eyes that showed clear mental instability. You stole my baby. You convinced that woman to pay me to keep my son." "Amber, you sold Matthew when he was born. You disappeared for 3 years and now want to claim rights you gave up." "I never gave up on anything. They forced me. I was too young. I didn't know what I was doing." One of the officers approached Richard. "Sir, we need documentation. Do you have proof of legal custody of the child?" "My lawyer is on his way with all the paperwork. The child has been under court protection since yesterday." Amber tried to run toward the gate, but was restrained by the officers. "My son is in there, Matthew. It's Matthew, it's Mommy, I came back." Richard froze. Amber knew Matthew's real name. Inside the orphanage, he could hear Matthew crying and calling for him. "I need to go in and calm my son down." "Of course, sir." Richard found Matthew hiding under the bed in his room, trembling and crying. "Daddy, it's her. The woman who brought me here. She was screaming my real name." "I know, son. But she won't take you. Daddy's here." "Why is she mad? Why did she say she's my mom?" Richard hugged the boy, feeling the weight of protecting him from a truth too complex for his age. "Matthew, remember when Daddy explained about different families? Some kids have parents who can't take care of them, so other people become their real parents. Like Mrs. Davidson here at the orphanage?" "That's right. Amber is the woman who carried you in her belly. But Mommy Jennifer and I are your real parents, the ones who've taken care of you since you were a baby." "And why does she want to take me?" "Because she's confused and sick, son. Sometimes sick people do bad things thinking they're doing what's right." Dr. Stephen arrived with all the paperwork and a social worker. Outside, Amber had been taken by the officers to give a statement, but not before shouting several threats. "Richard, the situation is under control for now," Stephen said. "Amber will undergo a psychiatric evaluation. The documents she has do prove she's the biological mother, but we also have evidence she abandoned the child and later kidnapped him." "What now?" "Now we wait for the court's decision. But given Amber's history of mental instability and the fact Matthew has been with you since infancy, it's very likely custody will remain with you." "How long will that take?" "A few weeks." "But Richard, there's another complication." "What?" "Amber claims she was coerced into giving up Matthew, that the transaction was illegal. If that's proven, it could complicate your legal standing too." Richard felt the exhaustion of the whole situation weighing on him. "Stephen, the only thing that matters to me is protecting my son. If we need to redo all the paperwork, if we need to go through another adoption process, I'll do it. But Matthew is not going back to Amber." "I understand. I'll do everything possible." In the following days, Richard established a routine of daily visits to the orphanage. Matthew was clearly traumatized by Amber's reappearance, but little by little he regained his sense of security with his father's constant presence. "Daddy, when can I go home?" "Soon, son. Daddy's sorting out some important papers." "What about the lady who was screaming?" "She's getting help from doctors. You don't need to worry about her." "Daddy, can I ask you something?" "Of course, son. Ask me anything." "Why did it take you so long to find me?" Richard's heart broke. How could he explain to a child that he'd been hidden by his own family? "Matthew, remember when the lady brought you here, she said your parents couldn't take care of you?" "I remember." "She lied. Daddy always wanted to take care of you, always looked for you. But some people did bad things that kept Daddy from finding you sooner." "Who?" "People who were confused and scared. But now Daddy's found you, and we'll never be apart again." 2 weeks later, Dr. Stephen brought good news and bad. "Richard, Amber was diagnosed with severe bipolar disorder and has been hospitalized for treatment. This practically guarantees she won't get custody of Matthew." "And the bad news? The original transaction was indeed irregular. You'll have to go through a new adoption process, as if Matthew were a child available for adoption in the system." "Does that mean other people could try to adopt him?" "Technically, yes, but considering he's lived with you for years and you've established bonds, it's almost certain the adoption will be approved in your favor." "What about Jennifer? She'll face charges for concealing a minor and falsifying documents. She'll probably get community service and a hefty fine, but nothing that would stop her from being part of the adoption process if you allow it." Richard was torn about Jennifer. On one hand, he was furious about the lies and betrayal. On the other, he knew Matthew had known Jennifer as his mother for the first 4 years of his life. Matthew asks about her sometimes. He says he misses Mommy Jen. That's normal, Richard. To him, she was his mother for years. No matter the mistakes she made, the child formed emotional bonds. I'll let him decide if he wants to see her or not. Good decision. When Richard asked Matthew if he'd like to see Jennifer, the boy's reaction was immediate. Can I? I missed Mommy Jen. Is she coming to take me too? Son, Mommy Jen also made some mistakes. She's fixing her problems, but she can visit if you want. I do. The reunion between Jennifer and Matthew was both emotional and painful. Jennifer arrived at the orphanage visibly thinner, with deep circles under her eyes. When she saw Matthew, she broke down in tears. My boy, Mommy missed you so much. Mommy Jen, why did it take so long to visit? I thought you didn't want to be my mom anymore. Never, my love. Mommy always wanted to be with you. Mommy just made some bad choices and had to fix things before seeing you. Richard watched the scene, feeling a mix of anger and pity for Jennifer. It was clear she genuinely loved Matthew, but her choices had been devastating for everyone. Matthew, Richard stepped closer. Mommy Jen can visit whenever you want, but you'll live with Dad, okay? Why can't Mommy Jen live with us too? Richard and Jennifer exchanged a loaded glance. Because sometimes, when adults make very bad choices, they need time to learn how to make better ones. Mommy Jen needs that time. But do you still like each other? We both love you very much, son, and that's what matters most. A month later, the adoption process officially began. Amber had been declared unfit for custody due to her mental disorder and history of instability. Gloria gave a full testimony, confirming Jennifer's version and showing genuine remorse for her role. I thought I was protecting the child, Gloria told the judge. Amber seemed desperate, said she'd discovered terrible things about the adoptive family. I didn't know she was lying. The final hearing took place 3 months after Richard found Matthew at the orphanage. The boy, now in therapy, had recovered many memories of his past life and was adjusting well to the idea of going home. Mr. Richard Thompson, the judge said, considering all aspects of this complex case, and most importantly the child's best interest, I grant you full and permanent custody of Matthew Richard Thompson, with complete adoption rights. Richard held Matthew's hand, both smiling. Does this mean it's official now, Dad? It means it's official, son. And can I go home today? You can go home today. The first night with Matthew back home was magical. Richard had recreated his room exactly as it was before, with the fire truck toys and even a new Pomeranian puppy they named Max Jr. Daddy, it's just like I remember. Daddy kept everything waiting for you to come back. And Mommy Jen? Mommy Jen will keep visiting you, and when she finishes sorting out her problems, we'll see if she can come live with us again, but that depends on a lot of things, son. Okay, so I just want everyone to be happy. 6 months later, Jennifer had completed her community service and undergone extensive psychological counseling. Richard, with time, managed to forgive her, understanding that her actions, though terrible, came from desperation and fear of losing her family. Richard, I know I don't deserve a second chance, but can I try to earn your trust back? Jennifer, what you did was unforgivable in many ways, but I also understand you were in panic and made terrible choices. For Matthew's sake, I'm willing to try rebuilding our family, but it'll be a long process. I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you both. You'll spend the rest of your life being the mother Matthew deserves. That's more important than any apology. 2 years later, the Thompson family was whole again. Matthew, now 9, had overcome most of his trauma with therapy. Jennifer had become a more present and mindful mother, dedicating herself fully to making up for lost time. Amber had recovered significantly with treatment, but agreed to keep her distance from the family, recognizing her presence would harm Matthew. She sent birthday cards every year, always with the same message: I hope you're happy with your real family. Daddy, Matthew said one Sunday morning, I dreamed I was an orphan boy nobody wanted. And how did the dream end? It ended with you finding me and bringing me home. And that's how our story really ends, son, with our family together forever. The end now, dear listener. Tell us, what did you think of this reunion story? Do you believe Richard made the right choice for giving Jennifer? Share your honest thoughts in the comments. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss other moving tales like this one.